Well, welcome to the Family Research Council, and thanks for joining us today for this important news conference and opportunity to address the issue of the plight of Syrians Christians community. The Christians in Syria right now and the territory of Iraq also are facing unprecedented persecution under the hands of ISIS. And as we've all seen in the news this year, over the past 6 months especially, the actions of ISIS are just beyond bounds and an incredible human rights crisis of our time. Many years ago, the world community came together after the horrors of World War II, established the United Nations, put in place a treaty framework to address these issues and the persecution like that which we are seeing in Syria, to make sure it never happened again. In the 90s, as issues unfolded in Rwanda, the United States hesitated to get involved because of the fear that a recognition of what occurred there as genocide would trigger the need to get involved and act. We hesitated. Many died, and later President Clinton went to that country to apologize. We must not hesitate to act again. The whole point, the entire reason for these international obligations laid down in positive law and recognized by nations, and their agreement to be obligated to follow these international legal treaties and obligations, is to prevent future atrocities from occurring. What we're seeing unfold right now in Iraq and Syria to the Christian community and others at the hands of ISIS cannot be allowed to continue, and that's what we're here to address today. I'm going to invite to the stage shortly Lauren Homer. Lauren is a woman who's an attorney and international human rights advocate who's been involved in these issues and has helped bring attention to the plight of Syria's Christians and others who are persecuted worldwide for their religious faith. She's going to set the framework and discuss some of the background to the issues we're going to address here today. And Laura will introduce our next guests, who are advocates at the fore and central to the push for recognition and attention on the plight of the Christians in Syria. So, Lauren, I'll invite you to the stage now, and we welcome Lauren.
Thank you so much, Travis. First, I'd like to say that we are so very grateful to Family Research Council for hosting this press conference today and bringing attention to the plight of Christians in Syria and Iraq. This is an issue that I've been working on since 2011 when the Syrian uprising first began. And one of the untold stories of that from the very beginning was that Syrian Christians were under pressure from violent Islamic groups from that very time. So ISIS did not suddenly appear on the scene last fall. They've been around. They've been in Syria. The Christians all over Syria and Iraq have suffered from discrimination and persecution, ethnic cleansing, and genocide for really a century. But in this last period, because of ISIS, because of the hatred in their ideology, because they want to exterminate everyone in the world who doesn't agree with them, things have become much more violent, and the mechanisms available to kill people have become much stronger, especially when you're dealing with essentially undefended civilian populations. So the area that we are specifically focusing on now in our talks in Washington, and I'll explain some of the meetings that we've had, is a small area called the Al-Hasaka province, which is located in northeastern Syria. It's something like a thumb sticking out at the top of Syria into an area that's bordered by Iraq, Turkey, and then ISIS territory. ISIS controls a huge swath of territory in Syria. It was big before they invaded Iraq, and it's become larger. This particular area is, if you think of the biblical times, where the Assyrians were beginning in 5000 BC, approximately. And there have always been Christians there since it was converted to Christianity by Paul, who you will remember went to Damascus, where he had the Damascus Road experience. And this is a Christian perspective on it, but still an important one. So Christianity's been in the area for over 2,000 years. This particular area has retained a Christian population for all those years. It was larger before the conflict. It was about 15 to 20% in this particular area. The other people who live there are Kurds and Yazidis, Ben Hadrins. There are a whole bunch of different Christian groups and some smaller religious minorities. They have been under pressure by ISIS for quite a long time, but in these most recent weeks, we've all read about Kobani and the siege of Kobani. After ISIS was essentially rebuffed from Kobani and the surrounding region, they moved their troops, their tanks, their weapons over to this Al-Hasaka region. You've read about what happened in Iraq and actually what happened before that to Christians in Raqqa and other places. When ISIS comes in, it slaughters all the young men. It turns women either into concubines or forces them to marry ISIS fighters. Christians have historically been treated by ISIS. They have a declaration where Christians are treated better than some of the other captives. They have the choice between leaving, converting to Islam, agreeing to live in dhimmitud, which means under the Islamic controlling authority, which means they would have very limited rights. They'd have to pay amounts of money in gold, or they can die. Those are their options. While many have refused, children have been killed before their parents' eyes. They've been cut in two. They've been buried alive. The same thing has happened to adults through crucifixions. The things that have happened to Syrian Christians are just beyond imagining. So in the Al-Hasaka region right now, there are essentially defenseless villages. This is an agricultural area. Communities are spread out. It's actually a very fertile area, and it sits over some main roads that go from Turkey to other ISIS territory, that go from ISIS territory in a different direction into Iraq, and we believe that ISIS thinks that if they can control the area from the Turkish border to the Iraqi border and take over this whole area, they will have a very strategic military objective, as well as seizing many of the crop-producing areas in Syria. There were surprise attacks on February 23rd, and I think I'm going to let my colleague Bassam Ishaq talk about this in more detail. But as you may have read, there was some coverage in the press, but not so much. ISIS came in and took a number of villages on one side of the Khabur River, and since then they have fought their way across, and they're now moving toward a key Syrian town called Tel Tamr. If they're able to take that, they will be able to proceed to achieve their military objective. We've been working for many years to try to bring the attention of our government and others who are in a position to do something about it in the United States to the plight of Syrian Christians. Of course, they're not all in this particular area. There's some under the control of the Assad regime, but this is one of the critical areas. And it was hard to get attention to this issue, sadly, until these terrible atrocities started happening in different places. And now we have those atrocities beginning in this area. So fortunately, there are many in our government that are quite sympathetic to this. There are many in the Congress and the Senate, in the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, in the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, and at the White House, who are quite concerned. And so what we want to do today is really draw attention to this problem, try to reach out to the world community and to our Christian community in the United States and around the world to get involved, to really try to do something to safeguard these people. If they can't defend themselves, they're going to have to flee. They'll need major kinds of refugee assistance. Really quickly, here in the United States, Bassam has been here many times, speaking to many people, seeking assistance for his people. Beginning last Friday, there were meetings at the United Nations, and a formal request was submitted on behalf of many Syrian and Iraqi minorities to have the United States declare this particular part of Syria, which has been abandoned by the Assad regime, and parts of Iraq that are primarily occupied by Christians, such as the Nineveh Plain, a special protected area. That would mean that UN would really come in and protect this area and ensure its safety in the midst of this war. Travis mentioned things about international law. One of the things in international law is if an area has been abandoned by their government, if it won't or can't defend it, then there is warrant for the UN to come in and play a protective role. The United States coalition has been doing airstrikes on some of the ISIS positions around al-Hasaka with great success, but it hasn't been able to continue to do them all the time, and without an enlarged amount, this area cannot defend itself against ISIS. Just to put it in perspective, the defenders have rifles, very little ammunition, and every once in a while they have a machine gun on a pickup truck. Meanwhile, ISIS has tanks, they have mortars, they have the full range of modern military equipment, which they've seized from both the Assad regime and the Iraqi government. We've been meeting with the Congress. Bassam spoke yesterday before the Lantos Commission on Human Rights. We have had meetings, or will, with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and high-level governmental officials who are concerned about this. So without saying anything further, I'm going to introduce my friend Bassam Ishaq. He's the president of the Syriac National Council of Syria. It's an umbrella organization that of all Christian and other minority religious and ethnic groups that works to advance their interests, both in the peace talks and in the world community to try to get assistance for his community. He's spoken in many places on many occasions, so I'll introduce Bassam Ishaq.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Good morning. First, I would like to thank the Family Research Center for hosting this press conference this morning. As my colleague, Lauren Homer, shared, I am here to speak about the specific geographical area in Syria, the northeast of Syria, where we have three major ethnic groups making a population of 1.5 million people. The population is made up of Arab, Muslim Sunnis, Kurds, who are also Muslims, and Syrian Christians. And these three groups and other smaller minorities have lived, peacefully together, coexisted, until we had the revolution in 2011. Actually, both Syrian Christians and Arabs and Kurds demonstrated together in the early stage of the revolution, asking for democracy and freedom and aspiring for pluralistic government in Syria. But shortly after, the Assad regime released Islamists from jails. And these Islamists who were from Hasakeh came back to Hasakeh. They dominated these early peaceful demonstrations and then forced the Christians out of these demonstrations. And then shortly after this, tribal Arab gangs began to target the wealthiest in the city of Hasakeh, which is the capital of Al-Hasakeh province. They were kidnapping of children, threat notes to people to leave town. As a result of that, for example, we had 200 Syrian Christian medical doctors in town. They were forced all to leave. and 3 hospitals, the 3 major hospitals in the town of Hasakeh, had to be closed. And this is when we decided, a group of Syriac politicians and organizations, to come together and form the Syriac National Council of Syria, to be a voice for the interest of the Syriac Christians whose identity was really at risk. The Syriac Christians in Al-Hasakeh made up about 25% of the population of the province. But we were fearful that this 25% is the most vulnerable of the groups, and under pressures we could lose their existence in their historical land that goes back to 7,000 years. They go back, as Lauren shared, to 5,000 years BC. And indeed, many Syriacs began to slowly immigrate and leave the Hasakeh province, because of the lack of security. That forced the Syriacs who were left in Hasakeh to form a police force for protection, and they called it Sutoro, which means in Aramaic language defense or security. And later, as the security threat became from ISIS, the Syriacs and Assyrians in the region formed the Syriac Military Council. So we have a police force that was for protections of villages and residential areas, and then we had the Syriac Military Council for the defense of the borders, to put a stop for the aspirations of ISIS to take over. Now we knew, as now the world knows, that ISIS will not tolerate Christian presence, nor Syriac presence. And this is very obvious for what they did in Mosul in Iraq, what they did in Raqqa in Syria, and in Deir ez-Zor. Learning from what happened to the Christians in Mosul, that was one of the reasons why the people, Syriac Christians in Hasakeh, formed the Syriac Military Council. But this even alarmed ISIS more. They want to just walk into where we live without any resistance. So now that we have decided to resist, even with very modest means, ISIS is putting out all kinds of threat against the Syriac Military Council. So now it's a do or die for us in this confrontation with ISIS in Hasakeh. So without assistance, specifically military assistance, and of course humanitarian assistance, because we've had thousands of Syriac Assyrians who had to leave their villages, we will be doomed. Our thousands of years' presence and identity in that region will be doomed. So this is very critical for us. The other efforts that we made to affirm our presence and identity in Hasakeh was to engage with the Kurds and Arabs in Hasakeh to form a democratic self-administration. This was necessitated by three factors. One, we needed to come together as a community, whether we were Kurds, Arabs, or Christians, and defend ourselves in the face of ISIS. Two, we needed to present a model, a pluralistic model for a new Syria. And third, we needed to really look for the humanitarian needs of our community, because we were receiving in 2002, 2013, 2012, many refugees from Syria inside other parts of Syria. So we wanted to address this issue, and this was translated into the democratic self-administration. This angered ISIS even more. They don't want a pluralistic political model. They want their model of one rule, the model of dominance. They want to capture what they claim to be Islamic land and turn Christians and Kurds and other Muslims who don't adhere to their version of Islam into second-class citizens who will be marginalized. So this is the fight that we have. We have also, we sought the UN help. We came, we visited with the, several countries on the National Security Council of the UN. We requested a resolution that will provide for an interim protected area in the northeast of Syria, in Hasakeh, and also in the northwest of Iraq, where we have Assyrian Christians, who have been dislocated because of ISIS. So this is what we're requesting. We also visited with the Russian missions, and they were sympathetic to that. We need the support of Russia. We don't want another veto for a resolution. So they expressed sympathy for our cause. What we are seeking is not something related to the conflict over power in Damascus. What we are seeking is a protection for the vulnerable minorities, and actually also a protection for our model that is a pluralistic, democratic, inclusive model. So this is what is our fight for. We have also visited, as Lauren mentioned, with officials here in the United States, and I've had the chance yesterday to give a testimony at Congress for the Tam Lantis Human Rights Commission. We are requesting of the United States government, and I say we humbly request, to increase their assistance to the Syriac Military Council. Although we are very thankful for the airstrikes, and they made a big difference, the minute they occurred, they uplifted the spirit of our people, whether they were fighters or feared civilians. But of course, this is not enough to put a halt to the ISIS advances. So we need an increased aid for the Syriac Military Council and their allies. As we speak, ISIS is trying to take over Tel Tamer. It's a very strategic town. If they manage to take over Tel Tamer, they would have managed to take over the crossroads to almost every major city in Hasakeh. So this will be very dangerous. And Tel Tamer has lots of Assyrian Christian population. So we need very immediate help and increased help in that matter. So this is in a brief, and I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with CNS News. I know that you're seeking specifically protection for this specific area in Syria, but in your meetings, have you discussed whether the Obama administration or its coalition should concentrate on defeating Assad or ISIS or some other scenario to end the threat that you're facing that needs protection?
Our focus was on the urgent situation in the Khabur, along the Khabur River. We did discuss the overall Syrian question, and they were interested here in the administration to know how did the Syrian opposition deal with our situation. And I shared with them how, our contact with the opposition. Unfortunately, they have not come out in any way supportive. They did, for example, the Syrian coalition in Istanbul didn't even issue a statement recognizing what happened to the Syrian Christians. And not just that, they issued a statement talking about specific Arab villages accusing the Kurds and Syriac of doing ethnic cleansing in these Arab villages, while what is happening in these villages is that the Syriac and Kurds are fighting ISIS, and there is no civilians in these villages. So this is, very disappointing for us. I am one of the Syrian opposition, and I used to look up for the coalition as for leadership for us to overcome the tyranny of the Assad regime and have a democratic, pluralistic Syria. But the actions in this situation do not confirm with our aspirations. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I've been covering the story for Breitbart and have been in touch with some of the other journalists who've been trying to cover the story. And I just want to say the really big difficulty has been simply getting hard news about the updates. Mm-hmm. And I think if there's anything that you can do to communicate with the people who are along the Kabul River Valley is help them find ways to get the news out to us better. Because without the hard stories, without the hard facts, it's really difficult to then persuade editors to keep covering it, right? And for example, the girl, and I don't remember her name, but the little girl who was abducted in that first group, and then she was released a couple days later, her father paid a ransom. Those kinds of individual stories, I think, really help to make it compelling for others. Okay, having said that, my question to you is, in terms of the Tom Lantos Commission and your meetings in Congress, do you get a sense of what we all could be doing to encourage them to take action?
Of course. First, I want to thank you for your earlier comments, about the lack of communication. We are ourselves suffering from this. We cannot communicate when we want, as much as we want. And we had requested actually help, in that area, so we could have easy access with the people, who are on the front line against ISIS. But what you could do, I think, with Congress represent the people of the United States. This is what congressmen do. So if they hear from the people that they want them to support the Syriac Military Council, they want them to support the Assyrians in their stand against ISIS to survive, I think this would be very helpful. But of course, also we need the media to cover what is happening, and also there could be requests for assistance in communication.
Hello. I haven't been able to follow the story at the UN and what's all the developments up there. Are you working with a nation's, a state on the Security Council? Let's say proposed a resolution, or could you sort of give some information on that? Or are there countries up at the UN who are closely working with you? I mean, you mentioned that you have the Big Five, but they're all probably involved in the sort of the political machinations, like the Russians and the U.S. and everything. Mm-hmm. Who is sort of helping you and do work with you?
Well, right. Well, at this time, it's an initial contact, and we presented the case, and France, for example, expressed lots of sympathy and willingness to work with us, and also, the Russians showed lots of sympathy to the cause. But what the comment that they made, the observation they made, that before that many UN resolutions turn out to be just ink on paper. That what we wanted to focus on, rather than spend all our energy on and focus on a resolution, is really practical, pragmatic ways to help the people on the ground. So but I would say, you know, they were all open. We visited also the UK mission and the United States mission. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you. It's good to see you again. You and I met in 2003, and I know your sister and went to church with her the whole time I was in Washington here. So it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And thanks for what you're doing. I do want to ask you a question that may make you a little uncomfortable, and feel free not to answer this question, but would you give me your opinion on arming this thing that is called the Free Syrian Army? And I will tell you up front, I'm adamantly opposed to it, but I'd really like to have your opinion on whether we should be providing arms to the Free Syrian Army.
I will try, you know, to answer. Well, I was never an advocate of a Free Syria Army that will be engaged in a military action against anybody. I thought that when Free Syria Army was first established, that it should limit its activity to protecting the peaceful demonstrations and demonstrators from government snipers. And actually, in the early demonstrations, when this was the task of the Free Syria Army, demonstrations were able to happen with no casualties. So this is what I think what should have been the focus of Free Syria Army, more like a police than an army. So I'm not a supporter of what happened later. Now the justification by the opposition who support Free Syria Army is that they had no choice because of the brutality of Assad. And I'm not sure I buy into this explanation. I think if the focus was only on the demonstration and expanding the demonstration and protecting the demonstrations, we may have had what we were hoping for and never materialized, a demonstration of 2 million people in Damascus that will force the Assad regime to step down and would be a way to get a democratic Syria. But how could a civil war now produce a democratic Syria? It actually opened the door for ISIS and other Islamist groups to get in. So I don't know if this is enough. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Along those lines, I was going to ask the similar question, but I couldn't remember the name of the Army. What else is the United States doing right now that is harmful to your cause? Anything besides what we're not doing?
Well, I would say that we need more action, more involvement. If the action stays as it is now, contained and only limited to airstrikes, I don't see how we could stop this advancement of ISIS. With the airstrikes, we have slowed ISIS, but we have not stopped ISIS. And we need to stop them, and we need to reclaim those villages that they took, because these are very poor people. I mean, the Assyrian Christians who are left in Hasaka today are the poorest of the poor. We need to get them back into their homes and villages as soon as possible. So I think this is what we would like to focus. Humanitarian aid. We need to really seriously have the U.S. speaks with the KRG government in Kurdistan, Iraq, the Turkish government, about having access for humanitarian aid for these families. We have about 6,000 people who had to leave their homes. So this is needed. As I said before, logistical support, increased support for the Syriac Military Council and their allies is also needed. And a political support. The U.S. is supporting and recognizing the Syrian coalition as representative of the Syrian people, or at least representative of the Syrian revolution. But this representative of the Syrian revolution is not representing the Syrian revolution. So they need to have a serious talk and say, we need actions from you that justify our recognition of you as a representative of the revolution. We can't have the U.S. recognize the body that is exercising racism against Syriacs. This is not a body that is about democracy.
So when ISIS began this attack on the Kabul River Valley, more than 200 Christians were abducted. And in the first few days, 19, maybe 22 were released, 21 released. Have you heard any more news about the fate of the remaining 200 plus Christians being held by ISIS? Is there any news?
Well, of course, we want to hear good news, but so far there are no good news. There is a Syrian bishop in Hasakeh who is negotiating through tribal Arab mediators with ISIS. So far, there is no breakthrough. ISIS seems to want to use them as a way to pressure. They have demands, and the demands change. One time they want the airstrikes, U.S. airstrikes, to stop, or they will kill the hostages. Then they withdraw this, and they have other demands. So I don't think we are about to see a breakthrough soon. But I want to, use the occasion of this question to say that if ISIS is to prevail in Hasakeh, if they can take 220 hostages out of 10 villages, that's also they've killed 15 fighters from the Syriac Military Council. If they can do this by just taking 10 villages, imagine what they will do if they will take hundreds of villages. The catastrophe. And then in Hasakeh, it's unlike Deir Zor and Raqqa. Deir Zor and Raqqa, they're mostly Arab, Muslim, Sunni population. So they're like kind of friendly ethnically to ISIS. But Hasakeh, this is the unfriendly, These are the Kurds and the Syriac Christians who are fighting and resisting. So if they are to prevail, I think we will see genocide.
Can I ask you another question? You said that the airstrikes that the U.S. and the coalition are conducting has slowed ISIS but not stopped it. What do you think needs to be done to stop ISIS then? Again, back to the question on what is the strategy that needs to be put in place to stop ISIS?
Well, militarily, you need to upgrade the capabilities of those who are fighting and resisting ISIS. Here, the Syriac Military Council and their Kurdish allies. Basically, that is, for now, this is the most immediate response to stop them. So without an upgrade of the quality of the weapons they have, I don't see how this could happen. Just by airstrike, it cannot happen more than slowing down, because they are outnumbering our fighters, and the quality of their weapons also much higher than what our fighters have. Faith.
Thanks, Bassam. The world view, or at least the U.S. view on this issue from like 2003, when I was working with the whole situation in Iraq and the fact that Christians were totally ignored, and I think that's been true with Syria too. I wanted to know if you thought that was changing at all. When you speak to members of Congress or to the administration, is there an acknowledgement that yes, the Christian population is very important and needs to be protected? And then my second question, just real quick, when you're talking about the military capabilities, do the Syriac Military Council, have they ever successfully had a fight against ISIS and taken their weapons? I know that's what the Sudan People's Liberation Army in the north does, and gets Khartoum's weapons. And not that that's a solution, but it gives people a little boost in morale if that happens.
Yes, the Syriac Military Council has captured many fighters from ISIS. We actually have more captured fighters from ISIS than they have, civilian with them. But of course, we don't kill them as they kill our fighters when they capture them. We keep them. Unfortunately, most of these fighters are from locals, from local villages, nearby villages. So this is a big disappointment for us that this is the situation. So we also thinking long term, how could we fight the ideology, not just, physically, militarily fight? How can you overcome this ideology of dominance and replace it with an ideology of pluralism and of power sharing? Yeah, thank you, Faye.
Thank you, Bassam, very much. Thank you. Well, no doubt there is a lot of heavy news here and information which it is important to know. The Family Research Council has wanted to bring a voice to issues that are occurring worldwide when it comes to Christian persecution. We want to continue to shine the spotlight on these issues and make sure people know about them. Oftentimes Christians don't have a voice. This information is not widely known. It's not reported. This is one of the reasons we're holding this conference today. We want people to know what's going on. In that regard, I'm going to invite our president, Tony Perkins, to say a few closing words about the issue of Christian persecution in Syria. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Travis. And I want to thank Lauren Bassam for being here and for speaking out on this issue. And I want to welcome you here officially to the Family Research Council. Rest assured, you have allies here. And we understand the significance of this issue. And I also want to thank those who have been working on this issue, especially those who have been reporting on this issue, because I think the silence is deafening. What we hear from our administration in regards to this issue, and even what is being said in the media. Travis made reference to this, but we have a long history in our country of understanding that religious freedom is an international human right. It's not just an American right, it is a human right. And we have stated that repeatedly in both treaties that we have signed on to, as well as our own our own domestic policy related to our foreign policy. The International Religious Freedom Act, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation in 1998, sets forth very clearly that this is to be a top priority for us in our foreign policy. Unfortunately, it has not been in the last 6 years. And we are seeing increasingly this spread of persecution of Christians abroad in Syria, Iraq, and other parts of the world. It's not limited to the Middle East, but it is most profound and pronounced in the Middle East. There are reasons that we want to advocate for religious freedom. It is a right in and of itself. In terms of our foreign policy here in America, we understand there's a growing body of research that points out very clearly that a society that has laws that protect religious freedom, and let me define that for just a moment, what religious freedom is, because we've had some in positions of influence today who have truncated that view to talk about the freedom of worship. We're not just talking about protecting your church buildings from being desecrated and bombed, although that's part of it. We're talking about the ability that you have to live your life according to the dictates of your faith. That means in your business, that means that you don't have to hide the fact that you're a Christian, whether you're in Syria, Iraq, or in Chicago, Illinois. And that has been lost both in our domestic and foreign policy. And there's a reason I think you're going to see increased concern among Christians here in America to stand with their persecuted brothers and sisters, although they should stand with them, period. There's a growing understanding that this increasing hostility toward Christianity here at home is fueling this persecution abroad. Because what I think these tyrants and despots abroad, when they look at America, where our own citizens are allowing our government to expand its hostility toward religious expression here at home, why would they think we would make it a priority in our foreign policy abroad? So we're challenging Christians across America to stand up for our religious freedom here at home so that we can advocate for our brothers and sisters abroad. And we encourage Christians across this country to speak to their members of Congress, to hold this administration accountable to the law, the current law, which says this is a priority. And Bassam made reference to this, but when we look at the definition, according to the Genocide Convention, the definition of genocide, this prohibits the targeting of a religious group for the purposes of killing members, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part, or imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children to another group. That's happening. That's happening in Syria and Iraq. Our administration has been reluctant to call this what it is, and it is genocide. And there's a reason. Because if we recognize what is happening in Syria and Iraq, we then have a moral and a legal obligation to do something. It's time that we speak up as a country, but our country is only as strong, I believe, as our citizens. And it's time that the churches of America make this a priority to pray for, advocate for persecuted Christians and other religious minorities. We stand as Christians, we stand for the freedom of religion, not just the Christian religion, but every human being, their ability to live according to the dictates of their faith. Our silence only encourages those who work actively to diminish or even destroy this fundamental human right. As Americans, we have a legal and a moral obligation to speak and act on behalf of religious freedom. And I do hope and pray that we will once again find our voice to speak and our courage to act. And I hope that you will take a message back to the Christians in Syria, that there are Christians here in America who understand their situation and are not only willing to pray, but also to act on their behalf. Thank you for being here today.